All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is Tawana B with Not Your Normal Conversation. And I finally have Andrea James here. My goodness, I feel like it took forever for me to get you on the show. As I told you before we started this interview, I was going to get a sweatshirt that said Andrea James for president because I feel like you do so much in the community that you barely have time, and not necessarily to give back. You're always giving back, but to make time to just set these things up. I think you need maybe more than one assistant. I can help you out with that if you need it. So, how are you today, Andrea?
I'm doing really great. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for finally getting on the show. I've been chasing you around forever. It was important for me to have you. I remember when I first met you, there was just something about you when you invited me to your function. It was just something about you and the respect that I saw that the community had for you that allowed me to truly understand the importance of you being a community leader. And not many people can lead. There are people who can join an organization and follow, but there are many people who can lead a community the way that I see. I watched the interactions with people at your cookout that I came to over the summertime, and I was amazed at how many people were in the park without incident. I want you to know I've never been to that park before. And the reason why I'd never been to it because there's been so much crime in the area, and I felt like, oh my God, I don't want to be dodging bullets. Shame on me for that. When I got there, I was pleasantly surprised at the surroundings and people just sitting out and talking to you and knowing who you are and waving at you from the street or wherever. How did you get to that place in the community where people have this much respect and reverence for you as a Black woman?
Well, I think first I just want to say that everything I do is part of a team. I don't do anything alone. And
Mhm.
so there's an incredible amount of both currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls that make up our team locally here at Families for Justice as Healing, and also through our national work at the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. So I I stand on their shoulders and their just incredible passion and intention to create the change that we hope to see. In terms of this neighborhood, and that was a neighborhood cookout where you were as part
Right.
of our Reimagining Communities work. I mean, my two granddaughters, 2 years old and 3 months old, are the fifth generation in our family. My 2-year-old grandbaby lives in this house, and so she's the fifth generation to live not only in Roxbury where we live, but in our house,
Mhm.
same house. And so being a part of a community, being a part of a Black community, which I am very proud to be, is something that we just are. And
Right.
I grew up in an amazing family. My grandmother broke the color barrier for nursing here in the city of Boston.
Wow.
The first Black African American nurse to be allowed to practice nursing in Boston, what was then called Boston City Hospital.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
And so I grew up in a household with a lot of African American firsts. My aunt was the first Black lead pediatrician of LA County. My uncle was the first tenured law professor at UCLA.
Right.
My uncle grew up right here in Roxbury.
Mhm.
My mother's brother. My parents are both educator activists and researchers of African people of African diaspora. And so I got it honestly. It was just indoctrinated into us when we were being raised up that uh, we love our people, and the fight for liberation, it was instilled in me early.
Right. And I see, I have a lot of respect for you. I want to be like you when I grow up, honestly. You know that I am formerly incarcerated. And to run across a person like you, who also was incarcerated before, I mean, as I said to you before we started this interview, I was reading an article on you in the New York Times. And the one thing that you stressed was the importance of doing the work and what you formed while you were inside of the federal prison before you even got out. Now, I said to you, for me, the only thing I was thinking about was getting out and being a better person, being a better mom, being a better sister, being a better daughter. Um, Not until I got out and planted my feet on solid ground did I think about the things that I wanted to do in the community. But for you, you were incarcerated and you founded FJH while you were incarcerated. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And what made you think of doing this and starting this whole organization?
Well, I always try and remind people that for us, our community doesn't stop and start at the prison gates. Our community includes our incarcerated loved ones who have been separated from us, but we still include in our community. And
Right,
for me, because of the fact that I did community organizing work, even as a lawyer, even out of my law office prior to me becoming incarcerated, and I had been raised in an African American family that taught us about the political and historical context of Black people and the struggle for
right,
Black liberation in this country.
right,
It it didn't leave me because I went into a prison. It
right,
only was exacerbated because I walked into a prison and it was just overwhelming to see rows upon rows of prison bunks that were crammed full of Black and brown women predominantly for
right,
things that women just should not be in prison for. And
right,
so I didn't leave my kind of community organizer hat at the door. It just naturally came into the prison with me.
right,
And, I had to figure out how to navigate through 24 months of being in a federal prison. I immediately met women that had already been there for 24 years.
right.
And
Wow.
so that was something that was just like a kick in the stomach to me. And I knew that, and these same women rallied around me and helped me to get, over the initial trauma of being incarcerated and being in prison and being separated from my children. My youngest was 5 months old when I went to prison.
Right,
Um, so, you just bring who you are into the prison with you and what you've been taught, and that didn't leave me.
right. And I see that. You do a lot in the community, a lot of work in the community. And I want you to know this. What I realize is I have some old stuff from when I was incarcerated, and it actually has this on it. And I didn't realize that it came from your organization. At Christmas time, at holidays, at Mother's Day, when people were really struggling just to get through the day, they were receiving random cards from not just your organization, but people that you had, like little kids in the community that were sending people at MCI Framingham messages saying, "Hey, we love you, we support you, we stand with you." And I just was looking at them maybe about a month ago, and I said, "These were from Andrea." And I said to somebody, "Oh my God, I had no idea that these were from her." But I want to say thank you, not just for me. I've heard your name in MCI Framingham. A lot of people speak of you, speak highly of you and the work that you're doing in the community. But I never thought that I'd come face to face with you. And I want to say thank you for all the work that you do in the community, to all the women. You don't know how much your organization means to a lot of women in the community. They stand on what you believe in, and it helps them believe in themselves. Because a lot of times when you have a woman that's doing natural life, never once do they think that they're going to get out, and they don't think that a lot of people are fighting for them. You, on the other hand, are on the other side fighting for free her. And I want to talk to you about this hashtag because I use it a lot. And I was thinking the other night, I use this, but what do you say to the people who, it's true that most of the women and young ladies and who experience incarceration have experienced significant harms at the hands of men in their lives. So how do you address the complexity of the situation that their actions also subsequently resulted in hurt and trauma to people in their lives and in their community? Like, what is your strategy to encouraging women to find healing through accountability, taking responsibility for their actions, not just saying, "Hey, listen, yes, I want you to be free," because you have daughters and sons and people that need you in the community. What do you say to the accountability piece of this?
Well, first, I want to say that violence didn't initiate with the women who are incarcerated. We live in a country that has based its practices and its policies and that secure those practices and policies for the benefit of a select group of people in this country
Right,
through the use of violence.
right,
Violence is in our cellular DNA in this country, and the criminal legal system is an output of that. And it has been um, uh, built upon a platform that is proven ineffective. If prisons were the answer,
Right.
as many people, we are the most incarcerating country on the planet.
We are.
And if prisons were the answer, and just taking people who have committed harm and interpersonal harm against other individuals and put them in prison worked, we wouldn't have the proliferation and the continuation of harm that continues to be seen on the nightly news. Um, and also prison causes further harm. Anybody that has been in prison can tell you about the culture of incarceration, which does nothing to help a person, particularly a woman who has suffered particular acts of violence against herself, to begin to heal and advance her life. And you have to shift yourself into something other than healthy and whole in order to survive being in prison. You have to psychologically and emotionally forget about your children. You literally have to put your children on the shelf, because if you think about them every second of the day, you would not be able to get through that experience. You have to shield yourself emotionally and gird yourself from the verbal communication and attacks from prison guards, from the assaults, from being strip searched, from the assaults of just being shackled and handcuffed, and also the fact that you're surrounded by other people who also may have never had the opportunity to begin to heal and advance their lives, and they're still causing harm to the people who are in prisons with them. So we have to start there first and identify, kind of take the indictment off of the individual and the focus off of the individual, and initially place that indictment on a failed system that absolutely has no legitimacy, which is our current criminal legal system in this country. It was built after slavery to oppress and control Black people. And those underpinnings and the policies that have grown out of it are still rooted in that. And so anything that is that rotten at the core needs to be eradicated, and we need to build a new, different system.
I
And so
agree.
that's the first thing. And so the second thing, in terms of addressing interpersonal and individual acts of violence, harm towards another human being, that's something that prison certainly isn't going to help you to learn about. You have to learn how to do that in your community. It's just like if you happen to struggle from substance use disorder, being, caged in a prison somewhere for 5, 7, 10 years isn't going to help you address and to learn how to manage your addiction while you're in that prison. And I want to pause there, because I am not, addiction wasn't my issue, and I don't want to go further talking about that. There are experts like Stacey Borden and other folks that have the direct experience, but also are clinicians and could speak to that. So we have a mantra: nothing about us without us, and it applies to us as well. If you don't have the direct experience, you shouldn't speak to it. But my point, raising that point, is to say that prisons aren't going to help us to address interpersonal harm. And if we continue to invest in them and not invest in the communities that are most entangled in the things that lead us to a prison bunk, poverty or mental illness or addiction, or many of the other things, we will only keep building prisons. And our communities are no safer. We had a minimum of 8 young people in my neighborhood alone in Roxbury that have died since January in 2020 of gun violence. We, every day in our neighborhoods, can hear gunshots, we see fights, we hear about things that are interpersonal violence issues. And until we begin to significantly shift resources from the gang unit who sits on the corners of our neighborhood, that brings no benefit to our community, to the prisons and the Department of Correction, we are not going to get to a place where we just had a policing reform bill that is called Policing Reform
Right.
Bill
Saw that, yes.
in a great way, because it only supports further policing. It has a $5 million infrastructure, that an apparatus that it's now, they found $5 million to figure out how to continue to contribute to the police in Massachusetts. Yet we have an entire infrastructure called Reimagining Communities
Right,
that has been no interest in providing any level of funding for, which is people led from deep within their neighborhoods.
right,
So we won't get there. Transformative justice and the practices of transformative justice, of how we begin to address not only individual accountability, but
right.
community accountability. How do
Absolutely.
we hold ourselves, and how do we create those alternate systems to police and prosecutors and jails within our communities that
Right.
actually get to the root causes of why people harm other people, and actually help us to stop further harm happening down the road.
Absolutely. So I spoke to you about your, you've done a lot of work with some of the presidents in the White House. One being Barack
One,
Obama,
one president.
president.
I never would have, and or have I worked with Trump.
I know you have not, and I wouldn't think that you. I don't think anybody that's watching this interview that you would work with Trump. But you have worked with Barack Obama. Have you ever spoke to him about ending mass incarceration and what that would actually look like from a standpoint of somebody who's not just been incarcerated, but from an attorney standpoint? From you live in the community, and I think that that is awesome, because a lot of times we have community activists that want to do the work, but are not in the trenches. They're not living in it every single day, so they don't have eyes to see all that's going on. What were some of the things that you spoke to the president about as far as the system, the broken system?
Well, we did have the opportunity to do some work and speak with the Obama administration, particularly Valerie Jarrett, who was his right arm at the time. We had the opportunity to also speak with Eric Holder, and also to Loretta Lynch, who eventually took over Eric Holder's position as the U.S. attorney. And I think in all of those discussions, mainly we were advocating for clemency. We were a part of a massive push from a lot of different angles, but we certainly were instrumental in advocating for more than 50 of the 102 women that President Obama did provide clemency for. We advocated for. We did a long-term, couple of years of symposiums around the country and law schools throughout the country, advocating for clemency on behalf of many women who came home, and including Alice Trump, who didn't get commuted by President Obama, but Alice Johnson, I'm sorry, who
Right.
didn't get commuted by President Obama. But we fought on the ground as formerly incarcerated women, many of the women who had been in the same prison with Alice, to advocate for her liberation. And fortunately, she didn't get out under Obama, and President Trump has basically used her as a political tool. But I am happy that she's home. Thank God she's home. She was a woman who was facing the rest of her life in prison, which was just outrageous. And so I'm happy that Alice was home, that she is home, and I hope the best for her. But she was also one of the women that we went to the mat for and fought very hard during the Obama administration for clemency. It's something that we're pushing in front of and trying to use our voices, having the opportunity to have spoken a couple of times with people from the Biden transition team,
Right.
to say now that an administration that we trust is back in office, we
Right.
want to resume, and we want them to remember all the work that we did during the Obama administration to raise and elevate and amplify the
Right.
issue that women are incarcerated too, that we still have women who are suffering, who are mentally ill, who are terminally ill, who are elderly, who are survived and punished, meaning women who had an altercation with a batterer, and that ultimately took that batterer's life.
Right.
And just women who are long timers. I mean, you've been sitting in prison for 10 plus years. You deserve a second look. We change. We can transform our lives. And so we're fighting very hard now to recenter ourselves as the organization, through the National Council, through our national work, and through Families for Justice Healing here in Boston, who's fighting like hell to stop the new women's prison in Massachusetts and to fight for clemency on behalf of the women, particularly the lifer women who are currently incarcerated there and the women who are sick and elderly.
Right. So, what do you believe are the barriers that keep groups, people, organization in Massachusetts from working together to create grassroots, to create a movement to ensure real legislation is passed to free her and free them all? Like, what is stopping us as a community from coming together and really tackling this thing? Because again, I was saying in another interview that I did, we've kicked down enough doors. It's time for us to tear down some buildings. We've kicked in enough doors and nothing has changed. So, what can we do as a community and as groups of people who believe in the same cause and are fighting the same fight, but maybe at different levels? What do you say that could bring us together, or what would you suggest that would bring us together so that we know that we're all fighting the same cause and that we want to all tackle this thing together to get some real laws passed, Andrea, so that we can move forward in a way that our Black and brown men and women are not continuing to go to jail? We're getting some of the heftiest sentences. I just got the chills just thinking about how someone could get, okay, a judge sentences somebody to life, but then gives them 30 years on and after. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you are basically saying, I not only am I'm giving you a life sentence, which means I'm basically putting you to die in jail, but now I'm going to give you 30 years on top of that life sentence. What can we do? Because there's so many people that are fighting this fight, but it seems like nothing is really coming together for us. How can we get together to really change some laws here, Andrea?
Well, I think we have to recognize that the current legislative system in our state, in the country, in most states, has been dominated by white men who have upheld a system that, irregardless of the oppression that it causes and the ineffectiveness of it, it's a system that does bolster the industry, the enterprise of
Right.
incarceration, of
Right.
prisons, of
Right.
all the money that it pays out to contractors and vendors, and the very carved out jobs that are provided. We have one of the strongest prison guard unions in the country. And
Yes.
there's this entire massive industry of things that are really built upon and perpetuated through misinformation and fear about who are the people who are in prison, what else is possible that doesn't just continue to put money in the pockets of other white men who benefit mostly from this system being in place. So
Right.
the only way that we can really begin, and when you've had this level of austerity, we did a look back, a 10-year look back, and then we did a cursory another 10 years even further back,
Right.
just in the communities where our Reimagining Communities pilot projects are here in Massachusetts. And what it exposed to us was the absolute level of austerity of investment in
Right.
our neighborhoods. I mean, up here where I live, we don't even have a community center. We have nowhere to meet with the young people who are entangled in this kind of gang life, or just saying to us, a lot of the young people that you saw when you came to the cookout that day.
Right.
And when you have nothing but the gang unit, the police and the prosecutors, and then the Suffolk County Jail waiting to take them, and then the prison system in DOC, and then being indicted to the federal system, which is the path for the young Black, predominantly boys and men in our neighborhood, and increasingly the women. And you say, how is this happening? And we get an infrastructure in place, yet we have no resources to sustain or to build up that infrastructure to create the change in
Right.
the local neighborhoods. That's the first problem. There's no will by the current politicals to invest in the neighborhoods, but they will continue as we are just seeing again, $5 million found from somewhere to invest in an apparatus for the police. Yet we still, out of the policing bill, there's no investment that's come into the communities for the grassroots on the ground work that we're doing. The other piece of it is because we as a people have been so entangled in the Black and brown communities, in the criminal legal system, because so many of ourselves and our loved ones have been removed from our families, it has caused a significant level of familial disruption, meaning disruption and separation of families, but it's also caused a significant amount of economic disruption. You cannot continually perpetuate separation and beating families down by incarcerating so many of the community without it having a direct effect. Every thriving community needs strong families and they need strong economic bases. And so we're trying to rebuild that through our own investment, because the city and state has refused to do this with us. We are doing this through the Community Love Fund that we've created, that Black and brown formerly incarcerated women have raised every penny for and are reinvesting in our hyperlocal neighborhoods so that we can, one, help our neighbors and our loved ones understand we're not just crazy or wanting to harm ourselves or bad people. This has been an outcome of being ignored with the resources that our community needs and that our young in particular, we don't need another generation of kids who are carrying guns and willing to shoot another Black boy. So there's different pieces here going on that we just decided, yeah, we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to make recommendations. We're going to continue to tell them when the policing bill is just a waste of time. We're going to maintain ourselves as a presence with legislators, but we're also going to turn inwardly. We're going to create our infrastructure of reimagining communities and literally break our communities down into bite-sized pieces and door knock and have conversations and bring resources and help our young and make sure that the mamas have electricity so that when their children are supposed to be remote learning during the pandemic, they actually can turn on the computer, making sure that they have a computer, making sure that these mamas and their babies have food to eat, making sure that these children, if their mother or their father is entangled in something that is not the most healthiest lifestyle or household, that the community is aware of who these children are and taking an approach from a community accountability space, that we are stepping in the gap, not child welfare services. Because child welfare, in addition to the 1994 Crime Act that we're seeing the outcomes in our neighborhood from, the Adoption Safe Family Act, which was passed in that same era, has been one of the most harmful, destructive pieces of legislation that has affected Black and brown families, particularly African-American families in this country. So we've got to find other ways. We've taken a long time. We did a 2.5-year listening tour, not only here. EFJA, Families for Justice Healing, led by Ayana Auberg, did a beautiful listening tour, all led by formerly incarcerated women, speaking to other formerly incarcerated women in that corridor. For folks who don't know, Nubian Square, what was formerly Dudley Square, up to the Franklin Hill, Franklin Field housing development and continuing all the way up to Mattapan Square, it's the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so we did a listening tour along that corridor, along Blue Hill Avenue, of female-headed, formerly incarcerated women households. And we also spoke with their children and children from our Sisters Unchained group of young girls who were either formerly incarcerated themselves or they have a parent who is incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, led that listening tour. And so we have the answers. You know, we know what is necessary. We know what's needed. Not one of those women said we want a new county jail. Not one of those women said we need a new women's prison. And if I could just, I don't know who will hear this, who can hear this, but we want to make sure that our sisters who are in that place called Framingham, the women's prison. First of all, Massachusetts has one of the smallest incarceration populations in the country. We have organizers and outreach in every women's prison in this country, state and federal, on our national work. We have organizers who are working with us from inside of the prison in Framingham, who are women who just want to fight for liberation and for what different looks like.
Right.
And helping on our clemency campaign, because we have a national clemency campaign that includes the women who are incarcerated in Framingham.
Yeah.
But I want to say this. I lived in a really disgusting, old, nasty prison. Stuff that we couldn't even define dripped off of the ceiling year round onto our bunks. In the wintertime, it was so damn cold that icicles grew on the inside. And in the summertime, the heat was so oppressive that women would just pass out. I know what that's like. The bathrooms were disgusting. The bunks were disgusting. The mattresses looked like something you wouldn't let an animal sleep on.
Absolutely.
I know what that's like. So we're not fighting not to have a new women's prison built, because we know that the women need something better. But what we are fighting for is that we have put in place over the years so many different alternatives that should be considered first before we spend $50 million in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to build a women's prison in a state that has one of the smallest populations of incarcerated women in the country. We can, with ease, we have the primary caretaker bill, we have Kimya's house and that model. We have so many alternatives that we could put to work with that $50 million, including funding the Reimagining Communities in the communities where most of these women are entangled in whatever landed them on the prison bunk. We can do so much better. And if we started there first, and through clemency, let's work through compassionate release, let's work through medical parole, let's get the women out first who can come out tomorrow if we utilize the work that we've done. And then whoever is left, whoever that the state with their power still deems the best thing for them to do is to keep these women in cages.
Right.
Let's then take that very small population, because we have solutions for that as well, that does not involve incarcerating them in a prison.
Absolutely.
And so that's why we want our sisters, and we're sending this message into the prison all the time. COVID has thrown a huge barrier into our ability to communicate with our sisters inside, but we want them to understand we're not asking that they stay in these deplorable conditions. We're asking, no, let them come out into the alternatives that are in the communities, and every community alternative has been proven, not by us, by years of researchers, that community engagement and community alternatives, community-based and people-led alternatives have 85% more success rate than any prison or any prison programming ever has.
Absolutely. I have to ask you this question because I know that you go into the courts with different people. I actually interviewed Wayne Lane, who was a person that works for your organization. And, again, anybody that knows you and that I've met and had a conversation with, they speak very highly of you. And I'm not trying to toot your horn. What I'm saying is that what people say about you when you're not around speaks volumes to your character, not you as a person, but to your character. Now, I spoke with Wayne and he talked about how you guys go into the courtrooms and you sit with, people and families and, try to help people navigate through the legal system, because it's tough. You're listening to a judge that says that your loved one is held without bail, and you really don't understand the magnitude of what that means and for how long, and if things will ever change. How often do you sit in the courtroom and you see a white person go up before your client and they say, well, maybe the best thing for them is to go to a treatment program, or maybe the best thing for them is to be released to their family. And then your client goes up and they're asking for a $20,000 cash bail. And it could be their first offense. How often do you see that in the system when it comes to Black and brown people, as opposed to people that you may just be listening to, waiting for your client to go up? And it's a totally different thing. It could be a worse charge than what your client is standing there for, but yet and still, they get to walk and your client could possibly be held.
Well, I mean, you don't have to believe me. I mean, there's countless research that has been done, including most recently a report that was received by the Chief Justice Gantz, God bless him, before he passed away. The Chief Justice of our highest court in the Commonwealth died recently.
Right,
And he, prior to his passing, the report was issued about the racial injustices and disparities in the courts and prisons in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so when I was practicing law many years ago, prior to my incarceration in 2010, I think it was around maybe 2008, a study even back then came out. We have countless commissions that have done research and have looked at from, former governors, every governor. We're the commission capital in, here in Massachusetts. And
right,
unfortunately, those commissions are just excuses to not do anything, but have another study done.
right,
There is just countless research and evidence of the disparities from policing to prosecution to sentencing in the Commonwealth's criminal legal system. And so it continues to happen. It happens all the time. This system is steeped in racism. Regardless of how much we want to say that, we're being unbiased, or where some judge that's sitting on a bench. It's one of the problems that we have with risk assessment tools. Racism is baked into these things.
absolutely.
We talk a lot about digital analysis and how do you create something that will create some equity in sentencing and things like that. None of those things work, because I don't care if it is even some sort of digital tool or artificial intelligence type of mechanism. A human being has to input the information, and human beings are baked with racism. And these protocols have been baked with racism. I mean, we have massive major foundations. We have massive organizations that have even indoctrinated the work for the past decade that's been done in the criminal legal reform space. Vera Institute has carried a campaign where they have extracted millions of dollars out of the criminal legal reform space over the years on reimagining prisons. Well, if you don't think that carrying on a campaign and getting millions of dollars for each of your organization's projects that work on pushing out the concept of reimagining prisons hasn't done harm to the communities that are in those prisons,
Right,
well, you're wrong. And we stood up and said, we're tired of reimagining prisons. We want to reimagine our communities, because we are very clear that there is just what I said. Mass Inc. did a report that demonstrated the geography of incarceration. They're all Black and brown communities in the Commonwealth. We know for a fact that we are disproportionately represented in the prisons in Massachusetts, the numbers of people that are there in comparison to our population. So there's no question about that. The system is rife with racism. It's not broken, though. It's doing exactly what it was built to do and continues to do, going on. And so, again, we've turned us inward, and although we still stay in the policy fight, in the legislative advocacy fight, and valiantly, Mallory Honora and the sisters at EFJA who go to the police contract hearings and all this minutia that nobody even knows we have to endure and to sit through, including court support, which we do. We have participatory defense, which we're part of the Participatory Defense Network, national network. Here at the National Council, Justine Moore is our Director of Training for Participatory Defense, but also here in Massachusetts, we've run for a few years now a standing room only. Even during COVID, people jump on the Zoom now, participatory defense night every week on Tuesdays from 6 to 8, where it's not led by lawyers, it's led by community people, loved ones who are coming in desperate for help for their other loved one or themselves entangled in the system. And they get help from people in the community that have been in their shoes. And they just help to, from a factual standpoint and from a support standpoint, wrap their arms around them. And that's where the court, Wayne Lane has been incredible. He has given so much of himself. This brother spent, years in Angola State Prison, which is an old slave plantation, where to this day, right now, as we're speaking, Black men are picking cotton and they're not paid for doing it. And so Wayne spent, I don't know, 20 years, 17 years in Angola, and still came home, and he stands on the front line with us. That's the character, that's the drive, that's the passion and the intention that the people that organize and work with us have to create this change.
Absolutely. So I'm going to tell you right now, add me, I'm in. I've been in since I met you. I said this, I know that you've been very busy, but add me, I'm in. And I don't like to be seen. I do this podcast because I need people to hear people like you. Because sometimes my voice isn't always big enough to reach the masses of people. I know that you reach the masses of people. So I use you as a tool and as an advocate to reach the community so that they can really understand the importance of ending mass incarceration, defunding the police, not building more prisons, because I told you some of my story. I grew up in a traumatic experience. All I've experienced my whole life is trauma. You throw me into jail, into more trauma. You're not really helping me. I don't really know how to come out and be productive because I'm thinking that's all that I'm worth. When you think that that's all that you're worth, that's all you ever become, you stand on that. You kind of stand on the fact that, hey, I've been in the system since I was 5. Like you said, family services, step right in. My mother was on drugs. She's been clean for 26 years. But the bottom line is that I stood in a system since I was 5 years old. So when you threw me in prison, it really didn't affect me because I knew how to adapt in an environment where people really didn't want me. So you just push me on to the next system. I need people to really understand that jails are not for a lot of us, especially in a Black and Brown community. We are forced into an environment that's not really where we want to be. So we adapt to our environment. I adapted to being in jail. I had family members say, you seem like you like it there. No, I didn't like it in DCF either, but I had to be in foster homes where they put locks on the refrigerators to stop me from eating at a certain time. So please believe me, I understand that the system is designed to keep us broken and for us to fail. I've been in it for too long, and I finally decided I had to break the cycle because it just didn't feel right. My spirit didn't feel right. And then I came in contact with people like you who I see that continue to do the work. And I want to stand with you. I want to help. I want to stop little kids from going into foster homes where people really don't love them. You took me from my mother to put me in a worse foster home. You could have left me where I was at. Those are the things that people like you can help with. And I want to know, and I want you to explain to all the listeners who are going to watch this in the next 10 minutes, how can we get involved in an organization like yours or yours where we can sit down and fellowship and get to know who we are as people and to help you fight this fight? We can't do this alone. I just feel like it's a lot. I feel like I want to break down and cry right now because it's a lot. It's a lot. I see you working hard. I see you really trying to make changes. I'm sorry, in the community that you live in. And I think that it really sucks that there's people who don't understand that you only make women like me worse. I was taken away from my mother, and then you threw me into a system that wasn't really for me. I had no understanding of that at all. And then you threw me into a prison where I was sexually assaulted by an officer. You threw me into a place that made it worse for me. It was never a good situation. And then there's people like you who say, hey, listen, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do this and I'm going to gather people. But people are afraid. Sometimes people are like, well, what can we really do for this woman? How can we really support her? What can we do to support our community? Like I said, I've never been to that park before, Andrea, and you want to know why? Because I was always afraid that maybe I might get shot going in there. Shame on me. I never went to that park before that day that I did when I went with your organization. That was the first time. It won't be the last. It's a beautiful park, and people conduct themselves in ways they adapt to their environment. You created this environment for us. This is what we have to work with. But I want our people to know that there's something better. There's people like you that we can kind of stand on, and I don't mean to say this in any way, we can stand on your back and create something different because you're building a foundation. We have to. So I need you to tell us how we can become involved in your community work. How can we volunteer? Where can we bring food? Where can we bring clothes? Where can we do this? Because I'm ready. And there's people who are ready. We just don't know where to start.
Well, thank you. We need all the help we can get. It's very difficult. And we are first and foremost, we're, you know, organizers. We're in our neighborhoods organizing through this very specific infrastructure that we've created called Reimagining Communities. And I think what helps Reimagining Communities to start to work is that we've taken communities that, not the entire Roxbury, but you have to break down the neighborhoods into bite-sized pieces where you can really begin to not ask anything of the community. You have to just begin to recreate community. You have to just begin to pour love into our neighborhoods and just find out who are your neighbors. Take tiny pieces of the communities and really do that work before you ask anything of anybody, because people are untrustworthy, rightfully so. And you shouldn't feel any kind of way about not wanting to go and hang out in our neighborhood park, because it's true. You could, there are times and given the wrong time and place where you could lose your life due to gun violence, and too many of our young people have. And
Right.
that's why we're doing this work. It's either death by incarceration or death by gun violence, and we don't want that anymore. And so we do have an infrastructure. We have a beautiful, and the thing about Reimagining Communities is it's actually led not by an organization, not by Families for Justice Healing or the National Council. It's an apparatus and an infrastructure in the hyperlocal neighborhoods that's led by the people who live there.
Right.
And then we begin to stitch those neighborhoods together.
Right.
And so we absolutely need help. We're so excited to talk to anybody in neighborhoods that are interested in thinking about doing this infrastructure in their hyperlocal neighborhood where they live. The other thing is that we're developing a people's assembly process. We've learned this from Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, who is a brilliant young Black mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. His sister Rukia Lumumba, who is one of the sisters who's in our abolitionist movement, who they learned the people's assembly process from their dad, the senior Chokwe Lumumba, who passed on. And it's a process where we actually have to teach our Black electeds in our neighborhoods don't quite understand this, that we really need to have them not sit up in this high horse and say, I think you don't know enough, so I'm going to tell you what is good.
Right.
But really roll your sleeves up, Black electeds, come and sit at the table in your neighborhood and talk to your people about what they want, and be willing to be brave enough to sometimes advocate on behalf of things that everybody isn't quite yet ready to understand. But it makes their job as our electeds even easier, because now they're just carrying the will of the people as opposed to making up something that they think works. And very seldom do the electeds who are representing the Black communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, particularly here in Suffolk County, have done this. Rachel Rollins, a district attorney, I know Rachel well. She's making a great effort to try and at least, and for me to advocate on behalf of a prosecutor is just like blasphemy.
Me too.
Blasphemy. But we need prosecutors who will stop prosecuting the way that we have been persecuted, not prosecuted, persecuted. And Rachel is making a valiant effort to do that. And she is. There is an entire working group of women, Black women, directly affected Black women, who get an opportunity to meet with Rachel Rollins to have this People's Assembly process. That happens every quarter at Families for Justice's Healing. The other thing is, we have a Representative China Tyler, who has adopted this People's Assembly process and says, I get it. Let me come in and let me meet on a regular basis with our people and find out what are the concerns and how can I be a voice for them. And so the People's Assembly process is the other way that we're working. And then the other thing that we're doing is this wonderful group that's called People Not Prisons. And People Not Prisons is this beautiful collective that comes together every Saturday. We've only missed maybe two. We've had our first year anniversary back in November, I think. But it's a collective of not just Black folks from the community, but it opens the door to let all of these other people, predominantly white folks, who say, I am an abolitionist also, or I am forward leaning. I want to be an asset, because what we hear from a lot of the, mind you, the Black and Latino legislative caucus is tiny in the Commonwealth. Everybody else is basically a white man. Right. And they tell us constantly, my constituents don't care about these issues. Well, now they do. And it's because of groups like People Not Prisons that provide us with research and advocacy and information and technological support. And many of them are directly affected themselves. White folks go to prison in Massachusetts. Absolutely. And so they're directly affected. They're worried about their loved ones. Many of them are from our transgender community, our LGBTQ community, which is just trampled on and ostracized. LGBTQ transgender women are some of the most brutalized in our prisons. Black and Pink is a part of that organization. So we've put together this beautiful compilation of progressive abolitionist thinking folks, Black, white, Latina, coming together, Asian, whoever you are, who want to be a part of this around the Commonwealth. And white folks from outlying neighborhoods take it upon themselves through Surge and Deeper Than Water and other groups to say, you know what, we got your back. Right. We know you can't do this alone. Right. We're going to be out here in our neighborhoods, in our communities, helping white folks who help to hold this apparatus in place to understand that they're doing what's wrong. You know, there's a lot of sheriffs in outlying communities that are just the darlings of their community. And the white folks out there just think that they know what's best because they've been tasked with managing these people who are so bad in their jails. It's not the case. And these people aren't on the side of what better looks like, what different looks like. And so we have a huge contingency growing every weekend of white folks who are standing on the front lines for us to say, we're going to stand with you and we're going to get this done in Massachusetts.
That's right. No, Andrea, I thank you for taking the time to talk to me. You know, these are the conversations that a lot of people don't like to have. I'm sorry for crying, but you know what? I think that this is much needed. It's about time that we have more conversations like this and people hear it, even when it makes you uncomfortable, even when it makes you squirm in your seat, even when you don't really. I think the problem here is people fear what they don't understand.
Yeah.
Right. So then you become ignorant because you're not trying to hear it. So now you're on a whole nother level. I think at this point, it's time for us to come together. I'm asking anybody that's listening to this podcast to support Andrea James in at Families for Justice as Healing. And I'm asking that we sit at the table with her and that we break bread with her and that we really, like she said, community can't come about if we don't get familiar with who we're dealing with, who's to the right of us and who's to the left of us. And it's not always a bad thing to do that. I think it's important that we stand in line, that we get in line, that we stand beside her, that we have her back because we need this. I hate to address it in this way, but Black and brown people, it's time for us to live and not just exist. We've been existent since the day we were born because of our ancestors and slavery. It's time for us to stop being in these modern day plantations doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for us. So people, please support at Families for Justice as Healing. Reach out to Andrea James. I mean, I was just joking when I say I do stalk her a lot. I send her 50,000 texts that. So just so you know, the reason why I did this is because I felt the importance of her being on the show and speaking about things that a lot of people, it's not that they don't want to hear it, they don't understand it. So there's a big difference.
Well, we need you. This is a phenomenal platform that you've created. I'm really very proud of you. And crying, I'm a big crybaby. I cry all the time. So it's just, when you know what the truth is, trying to convey the truth of what justice really looks like can become a daunting task, and it's overwhelming sometimes even to talk about it. So I get it. I cry all the time.
Yes.
There's no shame in that. But I want to just say thank you for allowing Families for Justice as Healing and the National Council to have an opportunity to speak our truths. And anybody interested, come on board. There's plenty of work to do. It's not one person doing a whole lot. It's a lot of people doing a little, or as much as you want to do. And we can create the significant shift. We do have a campaign going on that Massachusetts is a part of to end the incarceration of women and girls. And Massachusetts is centered in that national campaign because of our small numbers. We can, instead of building a $50 million women's prison, we can actually take that money and we can successfully create what different looks like and end the incarceration of women and girls in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we need your help. Anybody listening who wants to get involved, come on, we'll have a conversation and figure out where you most want to fit in, but we need you to come on board. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Andrea James, you guys, she's on Twitter, she's on Facebook, she's on Instagram. You can find her anywhere, just as I did. I found her on Facebook and I reached out to her. She may not answer right away, but she will answer. This is a cause that's worth fighting for. We're fighting for our freedom, finally being free for once. So again, she spoke about Stacey Borden. She's up January 11th, you guys. So stay tuned for that interview where I talked to Stacey Borden and her programs, Kimya's House, and the things that she's been doing in the community, who's also a formerly incarcerated woman. And I want you guys to stay tuned.
Stacey has the model for what different looks like, the model, what we could do with 50, how many Kimya's houses we could create with $50 million. We could create the shift so quickly if we had the will, the political will of the people with the power to do this. This is a sham, our current criminal legal system, and we can do so much better. So thank you again.
You guys stay tuned. Stay tuned. Get involved. Andrea James at Families for Justice as Healing. And she wants us to heal people. Who wouldn't want to be involved in that? You guys have a happy Sunday. Stay tuned. There's more to come next week. Bye, guys.